the story of The Ultimate Fighter has been told a lot in many different ways. But one thing that is agreed upon is the Ultimate Fighting Championship, as we currently know it, probably would not exist at the levels that it does if it wasn't for The Ultimate Fighter Season 1. That like I some of this stuff is a little overblown. Like they were auditioning or sending out audition things already for season 2 before the Bonner Griffin fight. So they signed the contract for the Ultimate Fighter season 2 during the Bonner Griffin fight. It might just be a bit of a tall tale, but still, like, there is no question that's the most important fight in UFC history, because not like maybe Spike was already logged in, but the rest of the viewers weren't. And to see the steady rise in viewers as that fight is going on is truly remarkable. And so I do think that, like, maybe sometimes it's a bit overstated for the story, but this is still the most important television show for, like, any sport ever, really. When you think of, like, one thing really tipping a show off, really tipping a sport off, that was it. And when you look back at it, they really did have the perfect reality show cast. This is back, like, 2005. It was kind of perfect timing, because you have the WWE, which was in a creative lull at the time. And you have a lot of wrestling fans who had come through the Attitude Era and were ready for more like that. And we're not being, I would say, fulfilled from a sporting standpoint. And then they put The Ultimate Fighter immediately after Monday Night Raw. And that set the table for this growth, because you had then some very frustrated and jaded wrestling fans going in and being like, oh, well, what's this? Oh, wait a minute. I can get some of the drama that I love from professional wrestling, and also get some of the violence that I crave from pro wrestling, for lack of a better term. And it's a little bit more legitimate. That I think was huge. And then, as I said before, they really had the perfect cast for it. When you think of 2005 and what that audience was looking for, obviously you had a bunch of guys who could fight. Like, there's no question about that. But you also had a lot of guys who were good characters for TV, both good and bad, for television. And so it was a real mix that I think just, it hit all the notes perfectly leading into this first season of The Ultimate Fighter. And the first real star of it was obviously Chris Lieben. And he had a bit of a roller coaster ride, as he starts out as the annoying guy on the show. He's getting hammered. He didn't pee, he spritzed in Jason Thacker's bed in that first show. He's getting absolutely trashed. He's trash talking everyone in the house. But then, on like 2.5 hours sleep, he goes into the first workouts and shows out and is just like an absolute badass in those. And so it established, like, okay, that this guy is actually legitimately here and legitimately a weapon. And he still continued to trash talk, and he was able to back it up until it came to one particular fight. But he was one of the first real stars of this show. And he ends up, kind of, to steal the pro wrestling term, kind of turning babyface during the whole Koscheck Bobby Southworth situation. Those guys kind of played the perfect villains. They could trash talk, and then to a certain extent, they could back it up. With Southworth, you have him, he's part of the trash talk. He is absolutely part of some of the problems in the house. He is a little arrogant, I would say, when it comes to his abilities inside the cage. And then he has all this trouble making weight. And now, I will say, we've heard later that it sounds like none of the fighters on the show actually thought they were going to be fighting on the show. The way it was apparently pitched to them is that they would go through all these competitions and all these challenges, and then someone gets picked off every week until we get down to the finale, and then you fight. But that obviously was not the case. And so Bobby Southworth has to go through this terrible weight cut. Chuck Liddell is pissed at him the whole time. And it really does expose the world to the grind that is the weight cut, really, for the first time. I don't think anyone really, like, some people knew, obviously, but I don't know if there was a lot of people, that the public sense anyway, of what actually went into these fighters making their contracted weight. And so to watch that was drama in itself. To see how pissed everyone around him was while it was going on, kind of made you, like, oh yeah, this guy is, what? this guy doesn't want it. And then he picks the fighter who a lot of people kind of assumed was not necessarily the cream of the crop when it came to this, in Loden Kincaid, who unfortunately has since passed away back in 2019. After some struggles with bipolar disorder, and also some struggles with PTSD from the military. But like, Loden Kincaid was not, he was up a couple of weight classes going into this. And so Bobby Southworth, this arrogant guy, picks him, knocks him out, and celebrates it. So people turned on him pretty easily. And Koscheck was, and probably still is, extremely arrogant and very sure of his abilities in that cage. And then also was a bit of a needler. And so that whole situation brought out like the first real drama of the series, where there's the big blow up. Lieben is trying to get away from Koscheck and Southworth after Southworth makes a derogatory comment toward Lieben about the passing of his father, and it just absolutely sets off. And then Lieben's trying to get away from everyone, and Koscheck and Southworth go out, spray a hose on him, and that leads to a Koscheck-Lieben fight, which it feels like Lieben's drowning in that fight, the wrestling ability of Koscheck. And so again, you get kind of the guys who are portrayed as the heels in this, they get the win, and it just feels like the star is drowning because he just can't get anything going, and the heel is holding him down. So there's stories immediately in all of this that I think attract a pro wrestling audience that, again, they are coming in after Monday Night Raw. And then you have the fights that are backing things up. It was the perfect mix. And then you get one of the more famous moments of the show, and it's the Dana White "Do you want to be a fucking fighter" speech. And it becomes like this whole thing. It's a breakout moment for Dana White, who obviously becomes the biggest star coming out of this. Like, before, you go watch some videos of Dana White speaking to like Goldberg and Rogan in the pre-tough days, and he's still holding on for dear life to his hair, and he's awkward, and it doesn't come across. This finally kind of brought him into a bit more of the spotlight, and was a very interesting note here to see like this guy really kind of transform into this almost character, but this guy who would become the face of the Ultimate Fighting Championship. And so from a branding standpoint, it helped Dana White out as well, and it became this big kind of rallying cry that would like inspire people to fight. It is interesting also to note how kind of fitting it is, but maybe from a negative standpoint, that this becomes a thing, because it's talking about these guys not wanting to fight for free. Like the fighters were not getting paid to be on this show, aside from, or not being paid to fight on this show, aside from a $5,000 bonus if you ended up getting a finish. And so that, sorry, cat in here. That does kind of become a sign of things to come for the Ultimate Fighting Championship, and how they would pay their fighters and stuff like that. So it is a little unfortunate that this famous "Do you want to be a fucking fighter" speech ends up being, a sign of things to come, and maybe isn't as grand and oh wow as many would make it out to be. The show also has some fighters who kind of change the perception of what a fighter is as well. Obviously, you have kind of the meathead stuff that I mentioned with Lieben and with Lieben, Koscheck, and Southworth. But you also have guys who I think kind of change the perception of what being a fighter was. And you have a few, for those watching on video, my cat making an appearance now. You saw the tail kind of go across there. But you have Nate Quarry, who approached things in such an intellectual basic undersells it quite a bit, but he was just like, yeah, I am here at Ultimate Fighter University, and I'm looking to get an education. You have Kenny Florian, who's like, yeah, I didn't come from a tough background or anything like that. I just love to compete. And you have Diego Sanchez, who on the show is just out there. And didn't exactly reel it back in post Ultimate Fighter either. But I think it kind of changed the perception of, oh, these are just a bunch of guys with tribal tattoos, wearing tap out shirts and affliction shirts, and just beating each other's brains in. There's different types of people on this as well. I also think they had perfect coaches. Chuck Liddell becomes an absolute megastar out of this. And like he was always the one that when the UFC was looking to promote something, he was the guy at the front of it. But Randy Couture wasn't necessarily the obvious choice for this. Like he's not big or outspoken or anything like that. But again, he kind of starts to change the perception of mixed martial artists and the respect that you need to have. And this Captain America persona, and it's an amazing yin and yang with him and Chris Lieben on the show as Randy ends up being his coach and then having to defend some of these actions and stuff like that. But it just it built their pay-per-view perfectly, and it ended up showing two sides of what a mixed martial artist can be, and two sides of what this sport can really offer you. And then obviously the finale delivers. Griffin and Bonner is one of the great fights you will ever see. It's the most important fight in the UFC's history, and it's not particularly close. What these guys are able to do for the full fight, and then you get the moment after where Forrest Griffin wins the fight, and then Dana says, you know what? We're giving both of these guys contracts. And he ends up giving one to Stephan Bonner as well. And it is just such an amazing moment on this show and such an amazing time for everyone. Now, it turns out like 8 guys from the show end up making it, but still at this time, you kind of thought that only 2 guys were getting contracts and the rest of the guys are kind of fucked. And Bonner ends up getting the contract. Amazing moment, amazing theater, amazing drama, all of it just perfect. 100% perfect on that finale. And then you get, coming out of it, we didn't really know how good these fighters were, right? Like, so it's like, should they get title shots immediately? And some of them would fail and some of them would go on to succeed, right? Like Nate Quarry fights Rich Franklin, and it's one of the legendary knockouts of the first era, or I guess of the post-tough era, leading up to UFC 100, where he gets just absolutely knocked out. And then, like, Florian challenges for a title. Sanchez challenges for a title. Forrest Griffin ends up winning the belt coming off of the show. So it legitimately created stars. Eventually, it starts to wear, right? Like, the format wears on people. The contracts are actually really restrictive. It is a 6-fight contract to fight in the UFC, but it's like $100,000 over 2 years and 6 fights. So when you spread it out, like I would much rather have $100,000 over the next 2 years than not, but it's not like this life-changing thing or anything like that. And it's not what you would get if you were a top prospect coming into the UFC and able to negotiate your contract anyway. So the format kind of wore on people that they didn't, a lot of MMA fans just wanted the fights. But I still think over time, this is an amazing way to build stars. Like, you look at what they did when they brought in a whole women's division, and Carla Esparza is on this show, and Rose Namajunas is on the show, and you have all these different fighters who kind of get their start, and that was right when I was introducing my wife to mixed martial arts. And so to have this show where she gets this background information and gets to know all of these fighters, that's what you're looking for in sports, right? In entertainment, in whatever. It is that personal connection. And I think The Ultimate Fighter still does a good job of getting that. It's just no one cares about it anymore. It's just kind of on there to fill a content contract, and that's about it. But I do think when done right, it is still an amazing way to build things up. And so the legacy of this show, you have so many amazing fighters who passed through this show at various points, right? Like I just mentioned Rose Namajunas, John Dobson, who is so much fun to watch. He passes through, right? Like in the early days, Forrest Griffin, Rashawn Evans, champions. Like I said, Florian, Sanchez, Nate Quarry, who was rather impactful. Michael Bisping makes his way through. You have like just so many. I'm leaving out a ton, right? Like Roy Nelson goes through the Ultimate Fighter. You have the Kimbo Slice season and all of that. So there were always these big names who were able to come through this. It was a great way to create stars out of guys who weren't in your promotion and introduce them with a ready-made fan base. It was a great way to bring a new fan base in, and it was a way to really change the game for the Ultimate Fighting Championship. And so as we sit here, as I'm recording this, on the cusp of UFC 300, there might not even be a UFC 100 if not for the Ultimate Fighter.